I'm afraid I went to UCD, and the only connection I have to Trinity is that two of my children so far have dropped out of Trinity. So I don't know what that means. So the first two sections, the origins and objectives of the national school system and legislation and system as it is today, are together in this talk. So my name is John Suttle. I'm with the Irish National Schools Trust, and the summary of the talk is called Illegal Religious Discrimination in National Schools in Ireland. I did a talk there in Limerick recently, and just before I went down, I had a look at the admissions policies of local national schools in Limerick, and some people might be under the impression that Catholics' first admissions policies and religious discrimination admissions is universal in Ireland, and it isn't. Of the first 10 schools, 9 had no discrimination on religious grounds in their school, and the only one I found was Cathoirleach National School. And I was talking to a priest down in Limerick who pointed out to me that Cathoirleach is not actually in the Limerick diocese, that it's in a Tipperary diocese, which probably explains why it has religious discrimination in its policy. Now, to understand what the ethos, what the thinking behind the national school system was, we're going to have a look here at the only quote I'm going to give you, which is from the Catholic Archbishop who spoke to Westminster in 1830, the year before the national school system was started, and it summarises what was being sought at that time and what is relevant today. He said, "I do not see how any man wishing well to the public peace and who looks to Ireland as his country can think that peace can ever be permanently established or the prosperity of the country ever well secured if children are separated at the commencement of life on account of their religious opinions. I do not know any measure which would prepare the way for a better feeling in Ireland than uniting children at an early age and bringing them up in the same schools, leading them to commune with one another and to form those little intimacies and friendships which often subsist through life. Children thus united know and love each other, as children brought up together always will, and to separate them is, I think, to destroy some of the finest feelings in the hearts of men." That was written in 1830. It was sent by, you see this list of organisations here, including some of the bigger teacher unions in England, sent into the UK Parliament again only in 2012, where they were expressing concern about the tendency towards having religious segregation in the system in England. The system was started with Edward Stanley, Earl of Derby, later Prime Minister of England, and the Stanley Letter is considered by the courts in Ireland as legally having the same standing as legislation. It is only subject to the Constitution or subsequent legislation, which may have introduced some small changes into this. So the Stanley Letter sets out a system of national education in Ireland which banishes even a suspicion of proselytism. It admits children of all religious persuasions and should not interfere with the particular religious tenets of any. It has combined literary and separate religious education to accommodate the different religious beliefs. And the national education system was for the poorer classes of the community. You might keep that in mind for later on. It was always imagined that people who could afford it would send their children to private educational establishments, which persist in a very small way now, but did persist for a very long time. I mean, there were many thousands of schools in existence before the national school system started in Ireland, all private schools. And the National Board should exercise a complete control over the various schools, which legally stays in place today, with the National Board being replaced by the Minister for Education. The national school began in 1831. By 1860, there were 5,600 national schools had been established or had joined the national school system with 804,000 pupils. I mean, isn't that a fantastic ambition to have achieved in only 30 years, 804,000 pupils. And the national school system, the legal position is summarised in this particular logo, that the essential part of the national school system is 2 pillars, which consist of children of all religions should be together in the same school, and there should be separate religious instruction to accommodate the different religious beliefs. Here we have the foundation document of the large majority of national schools in Ireland today. This is an application to be recognised and to receive state funding and to become a national school. And if you see question 30 down the left-hand side, will the school be bona fide open for children of all religious denominations? And the answer universally was yes. because any school that would not be open to children of all religious denominations could not be recognised as a national school and would receive no state funding. And here we see that people talk nowadays about how difficult it would be to have separate religious instruction, but separate religious instruction ran very well in the national schools for 150 years. Here we have the secular instruction to go from 10 to 2:30, 5 days a week, and as far as I remember in this school, the religious instruction was from 9:30 to 10 every morning. Again, another myth is that these schools were founded by the Catholic Church, which of course is a complete nonsense. I don't know of anything that the Catholic Church actually put their funds into, but certainly not into national schools. National schools were all founded virtually by local contribution, and this was a very common system. Here the local landlord, this is a school in Clontarf where I come from, the local landlord built and provided the school and happened to be a Protestant landlord. This school is now under Catholic patronage. After 30 years, the state set up a commission to have a look, see how the national school system was working, called the Powell's Commission. And within a couple of years, the churches went against the system and did not support having children of all religious denominations together. And the Catholic hierarchy had been lobbying to have the national schools changed into denominational schools. The Powell's Commission actually recommended, because people were dividing themselves, were walking past their local Protestant school to go to a Catholic school further away, or vice versa. And the Powell's Commission said that maybe we should get rid of the national school and replace it with a state-funded denominational system. The government refused to do this. From 1870 to 1920, the system remained legally in place. It's as non-denominational. However, the large majority of national schools catered for children of only one denomination. Well, maybe not the large majority. My brother is doing some research in Mayo, and in the late 1800s, 60% of the schools had only children of one denomination, and 40% had children of mixed denominations. By 1900, there were 9,000 national schools in Ireland, and the large majority of the 3,200 national schools today are successors to these schools. So when we come to independence, 1920, the system had not changed legally at all. There is a myth that somehow things changed, somehow they became Catholic schools and Protestant schools. This did not happen. That the legal system remained exactly in place, that the children of all religions should be together in the same school with separate religious instruction. In the foundation document of the state, the Anglo-Irish Treaty, there are only 18 clauses. It's only a 3 or 4 page document, and they're all political, military, financial, except clause 16, which is designed specifically an agreement between the British and the Irish that the national school system should be carried on legally into the new state. And this provision was copied into the 1922 Constitution, again ensuring that no law should be passed that would affect prejudicially the right of any child to attend a school receiving public money and without attending religious instruction at that school. So the same 2 pillars, everyone together in the same school with separate religious instruction. This was copied again directly into the 1937 Constitution, and the 1937 Constitution remains in place today. There's no amendments in relation to the religion or schools. There are 2 articles, 42 and 44, which deal with the relation between state funding, religion and schools, and these remain in place today. And you'll see in 42.1 and 42.2 that's underlined that the system of private schooling remained in place. So parents would have a right to have separate denominational schools, but only privately funded. In 42.4 we see there, when it came to state-funded schools, which are the national schools, there were very strong protections to protect religious equality and the rights of different children to attend the school. So, just a summary of 42, it guarantees the right of parents to privately funded denominational education. It guarantees that publicly funded schools will be available for all children who wish to attend. But it does not guarantee publicly funded denominational schools. So for instance, I live in Clontarf and brought up Catholic, brought up my children as Catholics, and we got state-funded denominational schooling because we sent our children to the local school under Catholic patronage and they got religious instruction there. But we didn't have a right to this. we only had the right to go to the school, and if we happened to be non-Catholic or non-Christian, we had to go to the same school. Now, the more important provision is probably 4424, which has been looked at widely, and this is exactly a copy of the Section 16 of the Anglo-Irish Treaty, where no legislation shall be such as to affect prejudicially the right of any child to attend the school receiving public money without attending religious instruction in that school. This had been looked at in the Supreme Court, which Barrington came to the same conclusion, that a school in receipt of public funds, any child, no matter what its religion, would be entitled to attend. It's been looked at by Owen Daly, the leading academic at the moment in Ireland on this issue, and the Equality Authority, the draft analysis, which was never published, but again agreeing with the same conclusion, that a child could not be excluded on the basis of his or her religion in a school in receipt of public funding. So the legal structure after the Constitution remains exactly the same, except with the small addition in the left-hand pillar that it added children of all religions and none. So there's no question of you having to be a Christian to have a right of entry, which had been the case in the 19th century. So now atheists or non-Christians have an equal right of entry into state-funded schools. This is the same school that I talked about earlier in Clontarf, same sort of thing. Clontarf expanded in the 1930s and 40s, and a new school was set up. And again, the new school, which is the school that is there today, was provided at no cost by the great-grandson of the previous landlord, Edward Kingston Vernon, again, famous Protestant family, and they provided a new school at no cost. In fact, the records of that particular school show that the Catholic Church is a net beneficiary financially. That in the 1990s they sold part of the property for £150,000, which they took out of the school. In the lease of 1943, in the same school, we see signed by John Charles McQuaid, Catholic Archbishop, and it has if you look in the middle there of the writing, has the same provisions of the national system of national education to afford combined literary and moral and separate religious instruction to children of all persuasions as far as possible in the same school, upon the fundamental principle that no attempt shall be made to interfere with the particular religious tenets of any inscription of Christian people. Well, Christian managed to hold on in the lease. But if you look at the full lease, you'll find there's no mention in these leases as to the religion of the school. So there's no such thing as a Catholic national school. You can look up the spreadsheet of all the national schools in Ireland, and the term Catholic national school never appears because it wasn't allowed. In the same school, again, there's one of these actually down in what's the Bunratty Folk Park. Yeah. Yes, and this is the board which was put up on the door of every classroom. And when religious instruction was going on, this board was turned to show religious instruction, and on the other side is secular instruction. So to accommodate the whole system of separate religious instruction for different children. The 1965 rules for national schools, which there remains a little bit of a controversy about the rules for national schools, that they are a ministerial order, or what's the term, Mike?
A direction.
No.
Or a circular directive.
Anyway, but they should go through the Oireachtas, but they don't. But the rules for national schools, the first chink in the armour of the national school system was these, which gave explicit recognition to the denominational character of these schools. So, in fact, we would recognise that national schools do have a duality of character, that generally they only provide one denomination's religious instruction, but they are open to children of all religious denominations, and they have separate religious instruction. And they deleted the previous rule, which had the periods of formal religious instruction. Oh no, it didn't. No, it kept in the present rules. It still has that system where the periods of formal religious instruction shall be fixed so as to facilitate the withdrawal of pupils. The integrated curriculum was introduced in 1971, which was the idea that religious instruction would be spread throughout the curriculum, so that if you were looking at a triangle in maths, you could talk about God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost as being a triple together, which would have been absolutely banned prior to this. And this, with the integrated curriculum, the first pillar gets a crack in it, that it became impossible to have separate religious instruction if the religious instruction is integrated throughout the whole curriculum. In 1996, there was a review group set up under T.K. Whitaker, the Constitutional Review Group, and it looked at this, and it said that there was no question that the integrated curriculum was in contradiction of Article 44.24, that the Constitution should be changed to accommodate this integrated curriculum, or that the schools should revert to the system which abided within the Article 44.24. And the review group recommended that the Constitution should not be amended because in a society that was turning multicultural, that that provision where children of all religious denominations should be taught together should remain in place. There was a deal, a secret deal, I would say, that's done prior to the 1998 Education Act between the Minister for Education and certainly the Catholic hierarchy. We don't know about the others. This has never been detailed as to what exactly the deal was, but certainly part of it was that a deed of variation should be introduced so that the lease we saw earlier in 1940 could be varied by way of a deed of variation. A deed of variation is like if you had a shop which was the landlord had designated to be a pharmacy and they wanted to sell on the lease and they wanted to become a beauty salon. You get a deed of variation that varies the lease to allow it to no longer be a pharmacy and to be a beauty salon. Well, in this case, it'd say the previous lease had no mention of religion in it, whereas these deeds of variation, I think I counted, there were 32 mentions of Catholic in a 2-page document. And it was designed to terminate the national school system and replace it with a denominational system without any discussion in the Oireachtas, without any change in the Constitution, and it's not accommodated in the 1998 Education Act. But this particular document, Deed of Variation, has been promoted by the Catholic Primary School Managers Association as if it existed in all schools, which it doesn't. Apparently some of them were signed prior to 1996, but no, the vast majority have not been signed, and I believe none have been signed in the recent past. Or they were signed up to 2006 and none after that. Anyway, this is the Catholic Primary School Managers Association telling the boards of management that their school is a Catholic school on the basis of a non-existent document. The 1998 Education Act continued largely the system of the Stanley Letter, with Section 10 and 11 allowing for the recognition of schools and thereby receiving state funding, or the withdrawal of recognition of the schools if the schools do not abide by the wishes of the minister. The Section 8 deals with the patron, and people who talk about the patronage as if it is important are really talking a church agenda. The patronage role is a position of obligation rather than rights. And if you look at the 1998 Education Act, it continues that system that has always been there. It's a middle management role, the patron. The minister is in control, the principal runs the school, the board of management gives some local guidance to the principal, and the patron ensures that the board of management does what it is meant to do. But the patron, you'll see here, I saw somewhere recently somebody, I think the Minister for Education saying, actually, the John O'Sullivan saying that the patron will remain in control of the ethos, which is just not there. It's just not in the 1998 Education Act. The 1998 Education Act provides that the ethos of the school be defined by this Section 15(2)(b), perhaps. The characteristic spirit of the school depends really on the traditions of the school and the foundation documents of the school. The obligation to uphold it is on the board, not on the patron. And as regards admissions policy, which is 15(2)(d), the board must publish only in such a manner as the patron considers appropriate. The only role of the patron in the creation of an admissions policy is the manner of publication. He has no to the content of an admissions policy. And section 30 and 33 are the main sections which deal with the control of the minister over the schools. And included in there is control over the admissions in the schools. The Equal Status Act, which is the last bit of legislation which relates to the schools. Now keep in mind that the 1998 Education Act and the Equal Status Act are subject to the provisions of the Constitution. Again, here are some myths growing up about the Equal Status Act in a big way. Section 7 of the Equal Status Act bans religious discrimination admissions to all educational establishments. Okay, do you understand that it bans religious discrimination in all educational establishments? But as we saw earlier in section 42 of the Constitution allows for privately funded denominational schools. So there is an exception put in there in section 7.3c. And section 7.3c is very conditional, and there's no national school that could get through that condition. Section 7.3c does not allow for the introduction of religious discrimination, unless your school discriminates on religious grounds from its foundation. Section 7.3c does not allow the introduction of it. And keep in mind that my children went to school in the 1990s. There was no religious discrimination in admissions to any Catholic school in Dublin. Now it is universal in the Dublin Archdiocese. When my brother's children went to school in the 1980s, there were no baptismal certs at all. In the 1990s, they introduced the baptismal certs at communion, at second class, because they found that non-Catholics were taking communion. Another section might be useful. Section 12 bans the publication of an admissions policy that discriminates on religious grounds. Now from here on, really we move into, there's a lot of noise, but here's the core issue as regards admissions. The top here shows a standard admissions policy, which is children from the catchment area getting in first, and where there are too many applicants, the eldest get in second. And the lower part is a Catholics First admissions policy. Now this is copied by all the other religions now. Well, perhaps not the Muslims, but certainly the Church of Ireland and Presbyterians, Methodists favour Protestants normally. So with the introduction of these Catholics First admissions policies in the early 2000s, we now have a crack in both pillars of the national school system, without any legislative cover, without any constitutional cover, and what's been going on ever since, in fact, since the introduction of the integrated curriculum in 1971 is illegal. The Ruane report, we tried to explain why exactly this is happening. The Ruane report really covered it very well. It talked about the collusion between the Department of Education and the hierarchy in covering up clerical sex abuse. And that collusion, it said there were rules that banned this. What was going on was illegal. There were rules against it everywhere. But the department ignored the rules, and the hierarchy ignored the rules. And exactly the same situation is happening today, where the Department of Education has, in the last few years, has begun to stop using the term national schools. It's there, the rules for national schools, but they're all now talking about primary schools, denominational schools, faith-based schools, whereas up to a few years ago it was all national schools. But it might explain why what is going on is being allowed to carry on. We wrote a report called Illegal Religious Discrimination in National Schools in 2011. It has all the relevant legislation, it's still there, it hasn't been changed, and legally it is unchallenged to date. The form on patriotism and pluralism in the primary sector was set up by the minister we have over here, Rory Quinn. A fantastic report, but unfortunately virtually none of the recommendations are being implemented. That the only one that there's some effort to implement is the divestment, and the divestment to non-Catholic controlled schools in a geographical area which has Catholic First admissions policy is leading to religious segregation. Accidentally is leading to racial and ethnic segregation as well. And this has not been recommended, was not envisaged by the Forum on Patriotism and Pluralism. Here we have the Catholic Primary School Management Association, who is the Catholic organisation advising all boards of management. It advises, if you're looking for the ethos of your school, to look at 8 editions of the Sacred Congregation of Catholic Education, to look at Gravissimum Educationis, which is a Vatican document, and one part of the Congregation of Clergy, another leaflet. Now, and they're telling all boards of management that this is how you find your ethos. And unfortunately, boards of management are often rubber stamps. Don't read legislation. Don't look about it. Don't do anything from one monthly meeting to the next. But the foundation, the ethos of a school, a lot of it can be seen from the Stanley Letter, from the Constitution, from the foundation documents, and from the records of the school. Evidence, my boy, evidence, not reports by journalists, and not assertions by clergy or other people like that. In the Equality Authority did a draft analysis of our report in 2013, and again it supported the contention. The main contention was that children could not be excluded, could not be legally excluded on the basis of their religious beliefs from any national school. The Joint Oireachtas Committee, its second conclusion was that multiple patronage and ethos as a basis of policy can lead to segregation and inequality in the education system. So although the concept of divestment was done with the best of intentions, the fact is that Educate Together schools and community national schools are becoming, in a lot of areas, schools for non-Catholics. And I say, I don't think it was what Educate Together was set up, or certainly not the community national schools, but the reality is that it is accommodating segregation, say, accidentally. The admissions to school bill, largely irrelevant. The proposal to amend, we would propose that if people want to do something with Section 70C, that they simply should amend it to exclude schools in receipt of state funding from this section. But I say we believe that Section 70C does not apply to any national school in any case. Here we see one of the instruments used for creating the religious discrimination. This is the present Archdiocese of Dublin. The main problem is in Dublin. Dublin accommodates nearly a third of the country's population, and unlike many dioceses around the country, the Archbishop of Dublin instructs and insists that every school under his patronage have religious discrimination in their admissions policy. I say it's not universal, but it is universal in Dublin. I say, to summarise, parents have a right to a religiously exclusive school, but only privately funded. They do not have a constitutional right to send their children to a religiously exclusive school. The state is obliged to provide free primary education, but only in schools that are open to children of all religious denominations. The state is not allowed to provide any funding to a school that has a Catholics First admissions policy. Present trends, as I say, the term national school has been disappearing for the last 5 or 6 years. It may be coming back a little bit. I noticed the Educate Together schools call themselves national schools, or communities system calls themselves national schools. I even heard Dermot Martin, the Archbishop of Dublin, using the term there recently. Children are being forced to accept religious indoctrination against their parents' wills. Children are being baptised against the parents' wills. And the state is supporting religious discrimination, which is not allowed and is not recommended by any state report. And basically we have an effort in place today to do what the churches have looked for 200 years, to have state-funded denominational schools, which has been denied to them for 200 years. So, in summary, again, the legal position remains largely unchanged since 1831. The same, all children together in the same school with separate religious instruction, but there are big cracks in that system at the moment based on illegal activity. And just to point out for the Minister, I think John O'Sullivan isn't here, but the Minister does not have the right to ignore constitutional provisions. Cannot decide, well, I don't really agree with that and do something else. The Minister is obliged to implement existing legislation and constitutional provisions. If they wish to change the system, they can introduce legislation, but until that is enacted, they must abide by the present constitutional and legislative provisions. The immediate solution, which was used very recently by John O'Sullivan, is simply to send around a ministerial circular which was used recently to get rid of Rule 68, but the same ministerial circular could be used to instruct all schools who receive state funding or public money that there should be no religious discrimination in admissions to their schools. And it could be done simply by a letter from the minister. Another much more difficult solution is to introduce some sort of legislation to amend Section 73C. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that was a very extensive